Eddie Burton's story is one that shatters expectations. At just 23 years old, he became the mastermind behind one of the largest and most complex drug networks in Europe and the UK. Unlike the violent criminals we often picture, Eddie operated quietly and discreetly, building a multi-million-pound operation that smuggled heroin, cocaine, and ketamine without drawing attention. This is not a story about street-level drug sellers trying to make money on the corner. This story is about a young man who began as a small-time player and slowly but surely built a 20 million pound drug empire across Europe. It was founded on control, secrecy, and a level of preparation that made it almost impossible to trace rather than violence or chaos. Eddie Burton was not just another name on a police list. He was a ghost, an expert at making sure his name was never connected to the drugs he moved. Everything began in Liverpool, where Eddie Burton was a little kid trying to understand life. But while his peers were worrying about school, Eddie, on the other hand, was already starting to walk the line between curiosity and criminal behavior. Eddie was already dabbling in the streets, doing errands for older kids, carrying small amounts of drugs, and learning how the system worked, all by the time he turned 10. Unlike the others close to him, Eddie was not in it for the quick thrill. He wasn't trying to get rich off the street hustle. Eddie had much bigger ideas. By 13, he wasn't just running errands anymore. He was watching, learning, and sharpening his skills. Eddie was laying the groundwork for something much bigger, while the other kids were worried about impressing their friends or trying to make a name for themselves. He learned how to move unnoticed, when to disappear, and when it was time to blend in. He observed the couriers and dealers around him, picking up on the patterns of the business, how to spot the police before they saw you, and how to stay out of sight. Eddie knew one thing: surviving on the streets meant staying hidden, quiet, and building trust with the right people, not being the fastest or the loudest. Eddie's role in the street economy changed as he got older. By the time he was 16, he wasn't just another courier. He had moved beyond that role. He was already orchestrating some of the deals in Liverpool, working behind the scenes and starting to move away from the physical product. Eddie didn't want to get involved in the conflict or violence sometimes tied to the drug trade. Instead, he focused on control. He wanted to distribute drugs without physically handling them. He wanted to be the one pulling the strings from behind the scenes, with no one ever knowing his name. Liverpool was starting to feel too small for him. Although he knew the ropes, he wanted to expand globally. At 19, Eddie quietly left Liverpool. No goodbyes, no big announcements. He went to Amsterdam, a city known for its connections to international trafficking networks and its anonymity. For Eddie, Amsterdam wasn't a place to relax. It was a smart move, an opportunity to grow his business, set up a base of operations away from unwanted attention, and begin creating the global network that would come to define his empire. While others in Amsterdam might have been more interested in the nightlife, Eddie was concentrating on logistics. He wasn't just smuggling drugs into the city. He was setting up the systems and networks that would make it all possible, controlling the entire flow of drugs. Eddie only needed to regulate the system. He did not have to physically come into contact with the drugs. Remaining ahead of the law, he kept a low profile in Amsterdam while transporting large volumes of drugs across Europe using couriers, fake identities, and hidden networks. Amsterdam wasn't enough for him, however. As Eddie's operation grew, so did the need for more distance, more cover. He required a foundation that would enable him to run without being noticed. Therefore, Eddie opted to relocate once more, this time to Spain. A sunny, serene country that provided him with the ideal setting to keep creating his empire, Spain was the ideal place. It was about establishing another layer of security, a place he could stay out of the spotlight and keep building his network undetected. Sean Banks, Eddie's partner in crime, was still in the UK as he sought to grow his empire in Spain. To the outside world, Sean was simply another Instagram celebrity leading a lavish lifestyle. Holidays in exotic spots, designer bags, and poolside lounging photographs. Behind the scenes, Sean was absolutely vital to Eddie's activities. Sean was ensuring everything ran smoothly back in the UK, as Eddie was handling the logistics from Spain. She ensured the drugs remained flowing undetected, cleaned the money, and managed the couriers. Sean traveled to Amsterdam and Spain, often from June 2022 to October 2023. She seemed to be just another tourist at first glance, but actually she was running the whole enterprise from behind the curtain. Sean was discovered attempting to smuggle narcotics into the UK on 2 different days. She carried drugs, ketamine and cocaine, totally under the radar, hidden in her luggage. To the authorities, she appeared like nothing more than a tourist. She had no criminal history. But behind the scenes, Sean was heavily involved in the logistics of the operation, making sure everything kept running smoothly. The first real break in the case happened in July 2022. Border Force stopped a truck in Dover. At first it seemed normal. The papers were good, the driver was relaxed, and the load looked real. But when they checked the truck, they found about 90 kilos of ketamine and 50 kilos of cocaine hidden under shopping bags and boxes. The drugs were hidden well, but the lab technicians found Eddie Burton's prints on the wrapping. He wasn't there, but it looked like he was involved. About 6 weeks later, they stopped another truck with 142 kilos of cocaine and 25 kilos of heroin. This time, the drugs were in a modified fuel tank, a professional hiding spot. But again, they found Eddie Burton's prints. He hadn't crossed the border, but it was obvious he was tied to it. Even if he wasn't there in person, the proof pointed right at him. As the detectives looked closer, they found a bunch of secret messages, cheap phones, and flight info. Sean's trips to Amsterdam and Spain, which seemed normal before, now looked like part of the scheme. She wasn't just traveling, she was helping run things, lining up deliveries, and keeping everything on track. By the middle of 2023, they had enough to start looking for Eddie Burton all over the world. The police in Spain and the Netherlands teamed up with the National Crime Agency. His downfall, however, came in the most unlikely place in August, a VIP section at a nightclub in Ibiza. There was no high-speed chase, no dramatic standoff, just a swift arrest that revealed a vast criminal network spanning multiple countries. Eddie thought he was untouchable, hiding in plain sight, but he was wrong. His whole operation fell apart. The extradition process was quick. By March 2024, he was back in the UK, and detectives had a mountain of evidence piled up against him. We're talking plane tickets, secret messages, those cheap, disposable phones, and even forensic evidence that put him right at the scene with the drugs. It was a rock-solid case. Before Eddie was sent back, Sean Banks was arrested in December 2023. Her phone was like a complete record for the whole operation. It had messages about when shipments were going down, where the drops were, and what the couriers needed to do. She wasn't just helping out, she was essential. Together, she and Eddie set up this big-time international drug business, going all the way from Liverpool to Amsterdam and over to Spain. Fast forward to February 2025. Eddie Burton and Sean Banks are in court. Eddie says he's guilty of 4 charges of bringing in heroin, cocaine, ketamine, and cannabis. The judge described Eddie as cold and calculated, a real criminal mastermind who managed the whole thing without ever touching the drugs himself. Then Sean Banks admitted she had committed 7 serious crimes, like money laundering and importing drugs. They said she was crucial to keeping things running, especially since Eddie liked to stay out of the picture. Eddie was sentenced to 24 years in prison, and Sean got 17. Their drug operation went on for years and made millions, with tons of people involved who didn't even know they were part of something so big. But in the end, Their quiet, careful business fell apart because of a couple of small mistakes, and because secrets never stay buried forever. The Eddie Burton and Sean Banks story really makes you think. It shows that the drug world isn't just thugs fighting in the streets. Sometimes, it's about staying in charge, keeping quiet, and being able to move around without getting caught. But even with all their careful plans and being so secretive, they learnt that no matter how good you are, nothing lasts forever. What's your take on how they ran things? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you're into hearing more stories like this, give a quick like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one. It's 6 a.m., but instead of hot coffee, breakfast, and sleepy eyes, Aram Shaybani was frantically running around his flat, smashing up things and flushing them down the toilet. But loud banging at his door told the entire story. He thought removing those things and being calm would save him. But what the police uncovered in his flat brought over 20 years of Aram Shaybani's life open, and finally answering curious questions like, how could a man with no job afford flashy cars worth millions and expensive properties all over Europe? Who really was this Aram Shaybani, and how did he manage to do all this? Today we will look at the story of a jobless man who built an empire on lies and deception, and how he lost it all. Manchester, 1986. An Iranian immigrant family comes to the UK, having left Iran because of the Iraq-Iran war. After settling in Manchester as an Iranian refugee, Aram Shaybani was limited to taking very low jobs to stay afloat. But that all would soon change. In the early 2000s, with the housing boom in the UK, the banks were accepting self-certified mortgages. Shaybani saw the opportunity and acted. He began applying for these easy mortgages, claiming he was a bank manager or interior decorator. But he didn't stop there. To make his lies more convincing, he began forging documents like bank statements and transaction receipts to back this up. With this, he acquired more than 20 properties in England and Spain alone. With such wealth came the opportunity for Shaybani to put himself out in the world as a legitimate real estate businessman. To ensure the narrative was very convincing, he began having plastic surgery. But that was not all. Shaybani began purchasing classic cars. With this, he could look more like what he claimed to be, a real estate investor with houses in Greater Manchester, Kensington, and other places in Spain. Shaybani was not just a millionaire, but a very good actor. He posted pictures of himself in very expensive spots, places like penthouses, on the beach, on expensive yachts. All these pictures were not just posted carelessly. They were a careful arrangement to guide the narrative of who he really was. The logic was simple yet smart. Nobody who was running from the law could live that openly. He fooled the authorities, but his deception never lasted. Shaybani also frequently bought and sold properties and bought expensive art. By 2005, Shaybani had around £5 million in properties, £1.2 million in cash, £1.5 million in crypto assets, luxury cars, and artwork worth a fortune. But something still looked suspicious about him. Perhaps it was because he had such wealth with no working source, or how lavishly he lived. But the major truth was that this was all a cover-up for something even bigger: drugs. Shaybani was not just someone in a long drug market chain. He was an original kingpin. He controlled the market, selling drugs directly from the producers to major traffickers in the drug trade. But even the story of this drug kingpin had a beginning. Shaybani, being an already self-made millionaire, had the opportunity of skipping some steps in the drug business ladder. The producers wanted the money, and he had lots of it. So he began with doing big trades and running international businesses. First of all, he established many links with a plan to set up a self-working and secretive system of trade. Now Shaybani was known to make many expensive trips to elegant places like Dubai, Canada, and many other places. But one place stood out: Colombia. Shaybani made frequent trips to Colombia, and unlike his frequent journeys, this one had no photos posted or evidence of being there in his reports. That was the first gap in his story that made the UK detectives already watching him more suspicious. They began watching very closely. His trips would be later revealed to be meetings with cocaine producers, even though he called it research trips. He later began buying industrial instruments. At the beginning, 2 30-ton industrial presses, plastic vacuum sealing bags, and all he needed for converting cocaine paste into powder on a large scale. His trade went beyond the UK. He had trade access to places like Spain, Belgium, and the Netherlands, buying directly from the producers and supplying. This went on for 2 decades without the authorities knowing a single thing. But he didn't know they were watching, looking for something to hold. And soon enough they found it, and then they struck. Greater Manchester. It was 6 a.m. Shaybani heard loud bangs on the door of his apartment. He immediately found out it was the police and stalled for time. But the police broke in. They caught him in the bathroom, destroying all evidence, including his phone. But this wasn't just any phone. It was a military-grade phone with a top-notch security system. This was his desperate effort to dispose of evidence, but police managed to recover it all. In his apartment in Greater Manchester, police found clean sheets of cash worth up to £167,000 and cocaine. They also came across crypto recovery codes. But this was the least of what they would see later. The police went to his next apartment in West London, Kensington. At this apartment, they found Class A and Class B drugs, large wraps of cocaine, ecstasy, and MDMA. The flat was like a gallery with artworks by Banksy and Warhol all over the place. There they also found over £1 million in neatly packed cash. When they searched his apartment in Ibiza, they found documents that showed high-value transactions, deals, documented agreements, and international activities. Shaybani had built a successful empire and was running things all over Europe from his flat. And here he was, with his secret discovered. But all the evidence did not give the full story, and sure enough, the police were watching for more trails to bring it all out. The trial began in court, and detectives looked at the case, presenting evidence that Shaybani was not just anyone in the drug business, but at the top of the ladder. Their piece of evidence was as follows: documents and receipts of 10 industrial-sized cash-counting machines, but only 3 were recovered. Encro phones to encrypt his activities and deals. Lastly, his crypto account, where they could recover £1.2 million. But that wasn't enough. The police decided to search other places for online evidence, and so Greater Manchester Police decided to go digital. They searched to find all digital trails and clients they could see. Millions of documents were accessed, from his hospital bills to all his account transactions, emails to encrypted messages. They searched for something that could give the answer they needed. They found big club bookings, bank cards, plastic surgeries, and hospital bills. But that was not solid. Then they saw it: international transactions, forged documents, properties paid for not in his name, but with his bank card, insurance policies for houses not under his name. It was clear he had bigger connections than a normal distributor. That was when his trial got intense. Aram Shaybani is in court face-to-face with the judge with 20 different charges for smuggling cocaine and other drugs, forgery, money laundering, conspiracy of the drug import, and perverting justice. He was finally charged with 34 years in prison and an extra 3 years for refusing to open his encrypted phones in court. The case closed in 2022, but was later reopened in April 2024, not for his sentence, but for his money. The conclusion was clear but heavy. Shaybani was to pay £3.4 million or face an extra 10 years in prison. The court knew he had more of the illegal money, and they were going to recover every last bit of it. This was the rise and fall of Aram Shaybani's highly structured business, and the millionaire playboy finally moved from his penthouse to prison. If you like true stories like this, then click subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one. This is the extraordinary story of a talking parrot named Mango, a bird who, without any understanding of what he was doing, played a pivotal role in dismantling a dangerous drug ring in Blackpool, England. Mango wasn't your run-of-the-mill pet, squawking at random and mimicking the odd ringtone. He was repeating the exact phrases used during illegal drug deals. In doing so, this unsuspecting parrot became the thread that led investigators to unpick a criminal network run by a man who was still calling the shots from behind bars. It's a tale that begins oddly and ends decisively, with police uncovering a sprawling operation involving smuggled drugs, covert communications, and brazen displays of wealth. And it culminates in more than a century of prison sentences. The story opens in early 2023. Adam Garnett, already serving time for previous offenses, somehow continued to run a sophisticated drug trafficking enterprise from his prison cell. From within those walls, Garnett directed the supply of heroin, cocaine, ketamine, and cannabis across Blackpool. How? By exploiting smuggled mobile phones and concealed Wi-Fi routers to maintain constant contact with his associates on the outside. Those hidden devices, tucked away where they had no business being, became the first major clue in an inquiry that would reach far beyond a single cell. Garnett wasn't a petty offender. He showed a high level of organization and control, a man coordinating serious criminality despite the locks, the bars, and the routine of a high-security establishment. As the investigation gathered pace, it became clear to Lancashire police that Garnett's network didn't just survive his imprisonment, it flourished. He used encrypted devices to keep a tight grip on operations. Messages flowed, instructions were issued, and money moved. Among his closest associates was his girlfriend, Shannon Hilton. She wasn't merely on the periphery, she was deeply embedded in the running of the business. And it was here, with Hilton, that the parrot entered the picture. Officers obtained a video that would become one of the most unusual pieces of evidence encountered in recent British policing. In it, Hilton can be seen teaching Mango to say, 2 for 25.
2 for 25.
A phrase that, in plain English, means 2 portions of crack cocaine for £25. The tone is light, almost playful. Hilton laughs. A child is present. Mango hops about and plays with bundles of cash believed to be proceeds from the gang's deals. To the casual viewer, it might look like a daft party trick, the sort of clip that circulates on social media for a cheap laugh. But to detectives, the words mattered. 2 for 25 wasn't random. It was part of the group's coded language, embedded within their trade. And when a parrot repeats your code repeatedly, on video, that's evidence. From there, the digital trail widened. On Hilton's phone, investigators found more videos and messages. Some recordings showed Hilton conversing with Garnett. In the background, blocks of cocaine were visible, presented almost as props, accompanied by music that glamorized drug culture. Far from hiding in the shadows, members of the group seemed eager to document their activities, to boast, to show off their cash and product, to perform success. The very footage intended to impress friends and intimidate rivals would, in time, help to bury them in court. Those images of drugs treated like trophies spoke volumes. Here was a network so confident, and perhaps so complacent, that it filmed its own downfall. Police then began connecting other figures to the conspiracy. One of them was Dalbir Sandhu, a trusted associate of Garnett. Sandhu's phone told a story of its own. Price lists, transaction notes, and research that indicated a keen interest in trafficking networks beyond Blackpool. He kept detailed records, entries that set out, in stark text, the mechanics of selling illegal drugs at street level and likely ambitions to expand. Each list, each note, helped detectives map relationships, roles, and responsibilities. Sandhu's paperwork, digital though it was, provided the kind of structure investigators need. Names, numbers, amounts, timings, the skeleton of an operation laid bare. Another key player was Jason Gerrand. A search at his home uncovered a stash of drugs and significant quantities of cash, items that tied him directly to the ongoing conspiracy. The link to Garnett was not speculative. It was direct and evidenced. The materials seized at Gerrand's address, when set alongside Hilton's videos and Sandhu's records, gave the investigation both breadth and depth. The pieces began to lock together. Who supplied whom? Who counted the money? Who took the risks on the street? And who gave orders from a prison cell? Then there was Gareth Burgess, a man who could not resist turning his life into a soundtrack. On his phone, police found footage of him walking through Blackpool with wads of cash, rapping about his involvement in the trade. Boastful and unguarded, the videos amounted to a kind of rolling confession. They helped corroborate the reality of the network's activities: money moving, drugs being sold, a lifestyle being advertised with swagger in public spaces. For investigators building a case based on patterns of communication, supply chains, and cash flows, those self-incriminating clips were a gift. The turning point came when detectives drew a straight line between Mango's mimicry and the gang's own documentation. The parrots, 2 for 25, captured on video with Hilton, matched the phrasing in Sandhu's transaction notes. The same language surfaced across messages and lists. In building a conspiracy case, it is not one single item that convinces a jury, but the accumulation, independent strands that align. Here, a bird's echo meshed with ledger entries and phone extractions to form a compelling narrative. This was a well-organized network, using coded phrases, operating at scale, and run by a man in custody who should have had no means of communication at all. Once detectives were satisfied that the pieces formed a coherent whole, Lancashire Police moved. The force's West-targeted crime team coordinated arrests and searches, executing warrants and taking down the network's key figures. In all, 15 people were arrested, each playing a distinct role within the operation, from directing orders to handling cash to distributing drugs at street level. What had started with a strange video of a parrot had become a fully fledged conspiracy case grounded in digital forensics, surveillance, and old-fashioned police work. In court, the charges were serious: conspiracy to supply Class A drugs among them, together with offences tied to the supply of other controlled substances. The sentences reflected the gravity and scale of the offending. Adam Garnett, the man orchestrating operations from behind bars, received 19 years and 6 months. His partner in the conspiracy, Shannon Hilton, was sentenced to 12 years. Dalbir Sandhu, whose meticulous records had helped map the trade, was jailed for 10 years. Jason Gerrand received 8 years, and Gareth Burgess, whose own braggadocio provided damning evidence, was handed a term of more than 7 years. The remaining members of the group received custodial sentences proportionate to their involvement, ranging from several years to well over a decade. In total, the combined terms exceeded 100 years of imprisonment. Beyond the courtroom numbers lies the method by which the case was built. Investigators used advanced techniques: digital forensics to extract and interpret phone data, surveillance to follow movements and meetings, and careful analysis to align words, images, and money with the physical seizures of drugs and cash. They tracked the smugglers' ingenuity in getting devices into a prison, monitored the use of encrypted communications, and demonstrated to a jury how a phrase repeated by a pet could be evidence when it lined up with human behavior and documented transactions. It is a reminder that in 21st century policing, the trail is often digital, and that criminals who flaunt their activities online frequently write the script for their own convictions. The significance of the operation was not lost on the force. After the case concluded, Lancashire Police highlighted the diligence of the West Targeted Crime Team and emphasized the importance of targeting organized crime, whether it operates on the streets or from inside prison. Detective Sergeant Anthony Alves described the investigation as a major success in the ongoing effort against organized crime in the county, a statement underscoring both the persistence required to follow complex digital trails and the willingness to act decisively once the evidence is in place. The message was clear. The force will continue to pursue those who believe they can run criminal enterprises from behind bars, and it will adapt to whatever methods offenders attempt to use. And at the center of this unusual narrative, there remains Mango, an innocent parrot, utterly oblivious to the consequences of his mimicry. He didn't choose sides, he simply repeated what he heard. Yet his voice, captured on a phone and played back in court, helped join dots that might otherwise have remained scattered. In a world where criminals resort to codes, nicknames, and encrypted apps, it is almost poetic that a pet's plain repetition of a phrase, 2 for 25, should become a key piece of corroboration. It's quirky, yes, but it also speaks to a broader truth. Crime leaves traces, sometimes in the places you least expect. This case will be remembered not only for the number of defendants or the length of the sentences, but for its distinctive lesson. Technology can be smuggled into cells. Messages can be hidden in encrypted chats. Money can be flashed on camera to impress followers. But evidence has a habit of surfacing. A video saved to the wrong device. A ledger updated one time too many. A boast wrapped into a lens. Or a parrot taught to repeat the language of the street. Collated and carefully presented, these fragments become a narrative that a court can weigh. And, in this instance, a narrative that led to heavy custodial terms for those at its heart. For viewers, it's a story that begins with a curious clip and ends with a decisive outcome. 15 arrests, a dismantled network, and over 100 years of prison time. For investigators, it is a testament to persistence, patience, and the ability to treat the unusual with the seriousness it deserves. And for the rest of us, it's a reminder that truth can arrive from unexpected mouths. If you've enjoyed this true crime account, please like, comment, and subscribe for more. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Britain's most secretive drug kingpin was able to avoid capture for over 20 months, running a multi-million-pound empire throughout Europe. For years, Jamie Stevenson was a name whispered throughout Scotland's underworld, planning a major global campaign from the shadows. With fruit shipments acting as cover, he trafficked tens of millions of dollars worth of narcotics, including fake Valium and cocaine. Stevenson stayed hidden and managed to avoid the authorities despite multiple raids, arrests, and intelligence breakthroughs until February 2022, when a tip-off finally led to his capture. One of the most complex criminal networks in the UK was brought to an end with his arrest. Before being brought to justice, this is how he developed his empire and remained concealed for so long. Stevenson's criminal path started well before his 2020 vanishing. Growing up in South Lanarkshire, Stevenson had smartly entered Glasgow's underworld, winning the confidence of major players by means of careful planning and thoughtful thinking. Unlike so many of his contemporaries, he wasn't a loud, attention-grabbing thug. Stevenson instead became well known for his intelligence, calculating nature, and patience. Though he became engaged in several unlawful activities in the early 2000s, it wasn't until 2001 that his name first made headlines. Outside a Springburn, Glasgow pub, Stevenson was suspected of planning the shooting and murder of his former best friend, Tony McGovern. Nevertheless, the case against him collapsed, and he was never found guilty. His quiet following the event only increased his mysterious nature, cementing his place in the Glasgow underworld. Stevenson's criminal activity had gone beyond violent crime and into the realm of money laundering by 2007. Under a rigorous surveillance operation known as Operation Folklore, Stevenson was found to be laundering over £1 million in illegal profits. Arrested, tried, and sentenced to prison time as one of Scotland's most senior criminal figures. Serving his term, however, didn't reduce Stevenson's activity. Stevenson had changed when he was freed in 2014. His former violent, wild attitude was gone. Operating as a planner, he started the groundwork for a worldwide drug empire. Stevenson made the most of his prison time on planning his next move. He employed a methodical approach upon his release, relying mostly on shell firms, trusted associates, and foreign connections to expand his business. While Stevenson stayed behind the scenes, organizing everything from afar, Gerard Carbin, his stepson, became one of his main right-hand men, managing logistics and operations. Stevenson had started laying the groundwork by 2015 for his most ambitious project yet, a multi-country network including money laundering, drug trafficking, and even the large-scale production of fake drugs. Knowing the dangers of being discovered, Stevenson played the long game. He didn't need to show off his riches or be spotted in public. Instead, he created a network of supposedly legitimate businesses, fruit import companies, shipping logistics firms, and offshore accounts that would serve as fronts for his illicit activities. The transportation of bananas was among the most important endeavors. These fruit shipments, which were regularly imported into the UK, provided the perfect cover for smuggling drugs. Stevenson made sure that these shipments seemed entirely authentic, so they could pass without being noticed by the authorities. Drugs were being concealed within the crates of fruit. Among his main vendors in Spain, David Bilsland was also connected to the operation. Knowing one another for years, the two men were essential in arranging deliveries across Europe through their secret encounters, often conducted in hotel lobbies. Stevenson's company was fully operational by early 2020. Glasgow was receiving dozens of banana shipments from South America almost every week. However, the authorities were beginning to identify patterns. Too many deliveries were passing through without any clear justification. Originally expecting only another shipment of fruit, Border Force agents started to be skeptical. Then, in September 2020, a refrigerated container arrived at the port of Dover. Although it appeared to be a regular fruit shipment, something didn't seem quite right. Behind the rows of bananas, border officers discovered 952 kilograms of cocaine wrapped tightly in silver foil as they began to unpack the crates. The street value of the cargo was estimated at £76 million. This discovery was not accidental. It was the final clue that connected Stevenson's activities to a larger international drug smuggling operation. The cargo was registered to Glasgow Fruit Market Limited, a business Stevenson oversaw behind the scenes. But the front had gone flawlessly. The man listed as the director of the company had no idea his name was being used to help commit such a major crime. Authorities immediately initiated a thorough investigation into the incident. They called it Operation Pepperoni, which involved monitoring the company and its connections to Stevenson. That was just the beginning. That same year, French law enforcement made a major breakthrough by infiltrating EncroChat, a European-wide encrypted communication network used by criminal organizations. This breach gave investigators access to tens of thousands of encrypted communications. As they decoded them, it became evident that Stevenson was at the center of a major plot. Discussing logistics, contacts, and shipping information, his encrypted messages appeared throughout the system. Though his name never surfaced clearly, the timing, contacts, and encoded language pointed back to him. The encrypted messages were frightening. There were references to Big Tasty, a nickname that aptly described Stevenson's physicality, movements, and decision-making process. More significantly, the chats disclosed something much more alarming. This was not only one kind of drug being smuggled. The talks were dominated by those about pills, pharmaceutical presses, and boxes arriving at ports in Spain, Scotland, and the Middle East. In addition to managing the cocaine smuggling ring, Stevenson was also running a fake pharmaceutical business, making millions of counterfeit Valium tablets for the black market. Investigators quickly discovered a facility in Rochester, Kent, where significant amounts of fake Valium pills were being produced. A raid on the June 2020 property exposed the whole extent of the operation. With machinery capable of pressing 258,000 tablets per hour, the plant was arranged like a factory. Cheap, simple to manufacture, and very poisonous when combined with other chemicals. During the operation, over 13.5 million tablets were confiscated. Investigators thought more than 28 million had already been distributed on the streets. Despite the scale of the operation, Stevenson kept away from view. He was not present at the manufacturing and was not physically involved in the daily operations. He instead remotely supervised the operation. He oversaw his team using encrypted messages, informed colleagues about shipments, and gave comprehensive plans for upcoming activities. While Stevenson was managing these large projects, his colleagues were also lending a hand. Under the control of his stepfather, Gerard Carbin, the factory in Kent, which was producing counterfeit medicines, was operating. Other network members, like Ryan McPhee, who oversaw the transportation of drugs between homes, storage lockers, and cars. But Stevenson remained a shadowy figure, a mastermind who didn't have to be involved in the daily grind of the criminal organization. He was always one step ahead, effectively and exactly managing operations. Although authorities were unable to locate him, he was believed to have traveled between Spain, the Netherlands, and possibly even Abu Dhabi. He remained completely hidden from law enforcement and used no bank accounts or phones in his own name. Though he had vanished, his network kept functioning, smuggling drugs and manufacturing fake medications. Investigators finally got a tip in 2022 that sent them to a man running in the Dutch countryside. The man was thought to be Stevenson. He did not resist when authorities approached to apprehend him. The criminal mastermind was back in custody after being on the run for 20 months. Stevenson's arrest ended a 2-year hunt. However, the officials still had more work to do. With mountains of evidence against him, the argument against him was already formidable. Stevenson initially rejected all, going so far as to accuse his former best friend, Stephen Jameson, of orchestrating the entire affair. Still, the defense presented a powerful case. From behind the scenes, Stevenson was shown in the EncroChat communications, giving directions, handling logistics, and controlling the action. More of his network began to fall apart as the trial went on. Associates such as Gerard Carbin and David Bilsland and others started to turn against him, admitting guilt and providing crucial evidence against him. Eventually, Stevenson changed his plea to guilty. The man who had formerly managed one of Europe's most complex and large-scale drug networks pleaded guilty to his crimes. He received a 20-year prison term at the Glasgow High Court, 12 years for his involvement in cocaine trafficking, and 8 years for his role in the fake pharmaceutical scheme. His friends received different sentences, with Gerard Carbin serving 7 years, and others like Paul Bowes, Lloyd Cross, and Ryan McPhee, sentenced to 4 to 6 years. Although Stevenson's conviction ended his empire, the authorities continued to work to recover the profits from his offenses, including luxury watches, jewelry, and money. He was additionally given a serious crime prevention order so that he could not rebuild his empire. But the story did not end there. Arguing that his 2 offenses should be regarded as part of the same operation, Stevenson's defense team filed an appeal. The court agreed in 2023 and reduced his sentence to 16 years and 3 months, commencing from the day of his arrest. Jamie Stevenson's case is a terrifying reminder of how quietly a criminal mastermind can work to create an empire spanning several nations and remain undetected for years. It also reveals how justice finally catches up with a criminal, even if they are extremely elusive. In this case, was justice really served? Or did Stevenson somehow escape the full repercussions of his behavior? If you like this crime story, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one. In broad daylight, a drug gang operated on the streets of Worcester, unafraid and completely unconcerned with being caught. Their audacity defied everything we thought we knew about criminal organizations. No hiding in the shadows, no secret hideouts, no disguises. Just ordinary cars on ordinary streets, every move carefully calculated. What they were doing was criminal, but the way they did it was a shock to the system. In 2025, this small Midlands town became the target of a network that ran like clockwork, defying the police at every turn. No one saw it coming until it was almost too late. The first signs of this new operation started innocuously enough. Addicts in Worcester began receiving text messages that seemed unusually direct and cold. One word stood out on their phones: Nico. No full name, no address, just a name and a simple message offering drugs. It was a small clue, but it quickly sparked the curiosity of local investigators. What could be behind this? Was it the work of a new, more organized drug ring? The truth turned out to be far more complex and terrifying than they could have imagined. In a matter of months, police discovered a network running a sophisticated drug operation, stretching from Luton to Worcester. The so-called Nico line was using the county lines model, a growing threat in the UK. Instead of setting up a fixed operation in a specific location, they used a series of moving parts: cars, burner phones, and a precise, methodical schedule. Their strategy was designed to make detection nearly impossible. By the time anyone could catch up to them, they had already moved on. At the heart of this operation was a man named Hashim Malik. At first glance, he seemed like just another young man from Luton. He dressed like any other teenager: tracksuit bottoms, a baseball cap, and a nonchalant attitude. But beneath the surface, Malik was a ruthless criminal mastermind who ran a highly organized network. He was the central figure in a ring that stretched across towns, a far cry from the traditional image of a street-level drug dealer. Behind his unassuming exterior, he was orchestrating a criminal empire, controlling the flow of cocaine and crack from Luton to Worcester. Malik had one job: to keep things running smoothly, and his plan was executed with chilling precision. But Malik wasn't alone in this operation. He had help from Muhiz Jamshed, a 24-year-old who drove the vehicles that transported the drugs. Jamshed had an intimate knowledge of the motorways, understanding exactly when the roads were quiet and the best times to make the journey without raising suspicion. The trips between Luton and Worcester were methodical and well-timed, almost like a delivery service running on rails. Jamshed would drive, unload the goods, and then return, ready to do it all over again. The whole operation was built on speed, precision, and anonymity. There was no room for mistakes. In Worcester, a different group was handling the street-level sales. Max Didcot, Saud Ali, and Karim Mustati were responsible for distributing the drugs once they arrived. These men didn't run the operation. They were the faces that showed up when it was time to make a deal. They were the ones who met customers in parks, supermarket car parks, or even at their front doors, handing over small packages of cocaine and crack. It was a disarmingly normal scene, and that was exactly how the gang wanted it to appear. They had learned to blend in, to make their illegal activities look just like another part of daily life. The criminal enterprise wasn't confined to just a few people at the top. At the bottom of the chain were those who supplied the cars, rented storage spaces, and kept the entire operation running smoothly. They were far less visible, but without them, the whole system would collapse. Despite the organized nature of the operation, the individuals involved were not hardened criminals. Many had ordinary lives before being pulled into the world of drugs: students, factory workers, unemployed youths. What drew them in wasn't a love of crime, but the allure of quick money and the promise of power that came with it. What was so terrifying about this operation was its methodical nature. It wasn't a random series of events or a chaotic mess of drug deals. It was a machine that operated like clockwork. The police were left wondering how they missed it. Worcester was a quiet town, but the number of emergency room visits for cocaine and crack use was rising rapidly. Other local gangs had been dismantled, so who was taking their place so quickly? The answer came in the form of those texts. Simple, efficient, and chilling. The text messages were brief. Nico, ready stock, same price. There was no name, no personal touch, just an offer to buy drugs. And the most concerning part was how the operation was structured. The addicts receiving these messages didn't know who Nico was or where the drugs were coming from. They were simply told when and where to pick up their supplies. No need for face-to-face meetings, no real address to go to, just a text and a promise of delivery. The operation was built on this simplicity. The Nico line used burner phones, cheap, disposable devices that could be replaced at any time. These phones were used to contact buyers, arrange meetings, and make transactions. The beauty of the system was that it left almost no trace. There were no permanent locations, no safe houses to raid. The whole operation was mobile, fluid, and nearly impossible to track. For weeks, the police watched in silence, piecing together the evidence. They began to notice a disturbing pattern. The vehicles making the trips from Luton to Worcester were always the same. Old hatchbacks or faded vans with Luton plates. The delivery times were consistent, happening on specific days of the week, and the route never changed. Even the drivers were becoming predictable. They followed a schedule so regularly that it became almost like clockwork. It was this predictability that would ultimately lead to the downfall of the Nico line. The police had to be patient. They knew that if they could just get a clear picture of the operation, they could take down the entire network. The problem was, every time they thought they had enough evidence, the operation would move and the trail would go cold. The Nico line was always one step ahead. The investigation reached its climax on a grey afternoon in early July. Police knew exactly when and where the next delivery was happening. Jamshed was once again behind the wheel of the familiar van, and the drugs were ready for distribution. Didcote, Ali, and Mustati were on standby in Worcester, waiting to receive the packages and distribute them to their customers. The police were ready. They had the van's location, the time, and the route. The sting was set. As the van entered Deanway, a busy street in Worcester, police teams surrounded the area. Officers moved in and chaos erupted. The van doors were flung open, and the officers shouted, "Police!" The drug dealers, startled and caught off guard, hesitated for a split second, but it was too late. The police had already surrounded them. They found the cocaine still on the seat, untouched, as the dealers were arrested. At the same time, other police teams raided the places where the drugs were being distributed. A supermarket car park, a residential area, and a flat used as a temporary storage space were all hit simultaneously. The police found burner phones, cash, drugs, and evidence that connected the Nico line to both Luton and Worcester. The network was no longer invisible. It had been brought into the light. The investigation's success lay in the precise coordination of resources. The police used a combination of surveillance, digital evidence, and forensic analysis to build their case. License plate recognition cameras and CCTV footage tracked the movements of the vehicles. The burner phones revealed who was communicating with whom, and the timing of the deliveries was carefully mapped. The evidence was irrefutable. At trial, the full extent of the Nico line was laid bare. Hashim Malik, the mastermind behind the operation, was sentenced to 9 years and 2 months. His right-hand man, Muhiz Jamshed, received 5 years and 2 months. The street-level dealers, Max Didcot received 4 years, 10 months, Saud Ali received 4 years, 2 months, and Karim Mustati received a sentence of 4 years. Several other members of the network, including Hussein Akhtar and Taylor Benford, were sentenced to lesser terms, though none of them escaped punishment. In total, 9 individuals were brought before the court, each connected to the operation in some way. The prosecution presented a damning case: 24 trips, hundreds of text messages from Nico, and the unmistakable structure of a criminal network that was running unchecked for months. For Worcester, the sentencing brought a sense of relief, but the damage had already been done. Families had been torn apart, and the town's quiet streets had become hubs for drug transactions. The Nico line had left its mark on the city, but the case was also a stark reminder of the lengths criminals would go to in order to operate undetected. The Nico line was not just a small-time gang. It was a well-run criminal enterprise, operating with military precision and exploiting the very weaknesses in the system that allowed it to thrive. Though the Nico line was broken up, the case highlighted a troubling trend. The county lines model was becoming more sophisticated, more difficult to track, and more adaptable. As soon as one line is dismantled, there's always the risk that another will rise to take its place. The question remains: how many more Nico lines are out there, operating right under our noses? In the end, Worcester regained some sense of normalcy, but the scars left by the Nico line will not fade easily. The operation may have been brought down, but the lessons learned from this case will stay with the town and with law enforcement for years to come. What do you think about the growing threat of county lines operations like the Nico line? How do you think communities can better protect themselves from these invisible networks? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Give us a like if you found this story interesting, and make sure to subscribe for more real-life investigations. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one. It's a quiet suburban street in Stafford. The sun is beginning to rise, and most are still in their beds. Police cars quietly pull up to a small dwelling on Canberra Drive. No loud sirens, no commotion, just the calm actions of officers ready to arrest someone for harming children throughout the UK. The resident of that dwelling is Brian Asante, a 23-year-old who would become one of the youngest and smartest drug bosses in British criminal history. But this is not a story of guns, violence, or territorial fights. This is rather more sinister. A story of how a young lad with a baby face turned kids into drug dealers using mobile phones, social media, and the deceitful tactics of modern criminal gangs. This was a business that employed vulnerable kids in England to smuggle heroin and cocaine from the West Midlands to isolated towns. As we dive deeper into this story, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss how Brian Asante's empire crumbled and how technology played a role in this chilling crime. Before we talk about Brian Asante's case, we need to understand the crime situation he was involved in. County lines is a new British model of selling drugs that has damaged many communities in the UK. The term is derived from the particular telephone lines that urban drug dealers use to take orders from buyers in rural towns and areas. But county lines are not just about selling drugs. It's about hurting children. Criminal gangs prey on vulnerable children, typically from broken families or struggling at school, and slowly recruit them. The children are given money, designer gear, and a sense of belonging. But in reality, they are living in fear, violence, and abuse. New government data reveal that approximately 14,500 children were categorized as at risk of being exploited for crime during 2023 and 2024. The Children's Society estimates that roughly 46,000 children in England are in gangs, but there are thousands more unreported cases. It is not only a crime, it is child abuse on a large scale. Brian Asante knew this system inside out, and he used it with terrifying effectiveness. Brian Asante was born in 1998 and brought up in Stafford. Unlike most crime gang leaders who have had troubled upbringings, Asante apparently had an ordinary middle-class upbringing. There were no obvious warning signs, no massive childhood issues that could have led to what he has done since. He was an ordinary young man. But under this plain appearance, Asante had something much more evil. By 2021, at the age of only 23, Asante had spotted an opportunity. The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted normal drug supply chains, brought economic difficulty to many households, and isolated vulnerable young people more than ever before. School closures meant less supervision, and financial pressures made the promise of easy money even more tempting for struggling families. Asante didn't look at these children as being vulnerable. He looked at opportunities. Between February and September 2021, Brian Asante built a well-established and complicated network of drug dealers, police later said. He worked from Wolverhampton and Stafford bases and set up two main drug lines, the J line and the AB line. The J line supplied mainly heroin and cocaine to individuals in Kettering, Corby and Peterborough. The AB line mainly operated in Burton-upon-Trent. These two operations collectively transported huge quantities of Class A drugs throughout the English Midlands and the rest of the nation. But Asante's real innovation was not the drugs. It was the organized abuse of children. He recruited a gang of adults who shared his complete disregard for the welfare of children. This gang included Emma Gill, Maurice Reed, Simon McTaggart, and a number of others from the West Midlands, Staffordshire, Northamptonshire, and Wiltshire. Each of the adult assistants had designated tasks. Some were responsible for discovering new individuals, others handled planning, and some managed the finances. But amidst all of this was Asante, coordinating it all through mobile phones and secure messaging platforms. The most shocking part of Asante's method was how he carefully selected children to exploit. Police investigations revealed that he targeted teenagers who were living in difficult situations, teenagers from broken homes, children struggling in school, and teenagers with weak family connections. One of the most tragic instances concerned a 14-year-old young boy who was brought to Oldham to sell drugs from a rented apartment. He was barely old enough for secondary school, was given a burner phone and instructed to send 100 or so messages a day, promoting heroin and cocaine to customers in the local area. The text messages were simple enough. Best gear in town, or fresh drop, text for deals. Behind each message, however, this was a kid who ought to be in school, hanging out with friends, or just doing what kids do. But this wasn't the case. Trapped in a rented flat, surrounded by drugs, forced to coordinate deals for adults who saw him as just a disposable tool. When customers responded to these calls, younger kids, some as young as 12 or 13, were dispatched to make the deliveries. They would arrange to meet customers in back alleys, hotel rooms, or agreed pickup locations. The deals were short, never twice in the same spot, and if police arrived, the kids were told to dispose of the drugs, drop the phones, and head back to their safe houses. But these were not safe houses. They were prisons. These kids lived in constant fear, cut off from their families and usual support systems, relying on their abusers for food, shelter, and even their survival. Asante primarily communicated with these kids via Snapchat, using the app's disappearing messages to leave no evidence behind. He sent secret instructions, coded threats that looked like encouragement, and promises of rewards that rarely came through. The kids learned to read between the lines, knowing when Asante was pleased with their work and when they were likely to be punished. What was so innovative about Asante's operation was that he used the latest technology to stay hidden. This was not the typical image of drug dealing: no street corners, no public displays of crime. Instead, Asante ran his business like a tech company, using digital methods to work more efficiently and reduce risk. The operation made heavy use of burner phones. These are cheap phones that can be replaced if the police traced them. Police discovered that Asante's crew used at least 30 different SIM cards during the first 3 months of 2021. They were sometimes registered under fake names or the names of homeless people who didn't know their information was being used. Gang used rental cars that they booked through apps. They constantly switched cars and even altered license plates to avoid detection by ANPR cameras. They rented homes under fake names, setting up a network of temporary safe houses that they could quickly leave if the police got too close. Asante used advanced technology to run his business from behind a computer screen. He rarely ever came into contact with drugs, never even saw one in real life, and had several layers of protection between himself and the actual illegal activity. If the police arrested one of his child workers, there was no direct lead back to Asante. It was the perfect crime system, with one flaw. Every electronic message, every phone call, and every car rental was traceable. And that trail eventually would lead the police straight to Brian Asante's doorstep. The investigation that would eventually bring down Brian Asante did not start with a large police operation, but with routine police work in various locations across England. Police in Kettering, Corby, Peterborough, and Burton-upon-Trent noticed that young people in these towns had the same type of drugs, the same kind of phones, and similar attitudes, despite having no obvious connection to one another. When the police began to share information between divisions, they started to piece together a picture of a complicated crime network. The biggest breakthrough came when police officers in Peterborough pulled over a hire car during a routine stop. They discovered a plastic bag stuffed under the back seat that held several wrapped packets of heroin. They were all professionally packaged and labeled, suggesting professionals made them. The driver's phone contained a lot of crucial evidence: call logs, texts, GPS information, and Snapchat messages showed there was a planned operation. When the investigators examined the phone records, they found patterns of interaction that pointed to drug deals in several towns. The phone records also uncovered something even darker than just your normal messages, but messages to children. Snapchat messages provided directions to these kids, meeting points, and code words that clearly showed they were being exploited. As the investigation expanded, the Midlands police forces began working with the West Midlands Police, who were leading the investigation. They exchanged information, shared evidence, and eventually mapped out the structure of what they called the J-Line operation. ANPR activity revealed how the rental cars traveled between Stafford, Wolverhampton, and the target towns. So on a calm September morning in 2021, when the police had enough evidence to move against Brian Asante and his gang, the operation was well coordinated with different police units so that all the gang members were arrested at the same time. Asante was the first one to be targeted. His Stafford residence on Canberra Drive was surrounded early in the morning by police. No shootout, no car chase, just a peaceful arrest of a young man who had made money by exploiting children. At Asante's house, the police found what they were looking for: Several burner phones, SIM cards, contact lists, and hidden records that showed the extent of his criminal operation. But the most disturbing discovery was the photos on his phones. Photos of Asante, bottles of liquor, and large stacks of cash, the cash he earned by exploiting vulnerable children. At the same time, police raided locations in the West Midlands, Staffordshire, Northamptonshire, and Wiltshire. Asante's adult helpers were arrested, and most importantly, the children being exploited by the group were rescued. Brian Asante and his co-defendants were tried in July 2024 at Wolverhampton Crown Court. The 5-week trial revealed the full scale of the J-Line operation and the systematic exploitation of children that funded Asante's lifestyle. The case against Asante and his crew was strong. The prosecution showed the court how Asante's business harmed real people. Victims who the network had exploited told the court about what had happened to them. They described how they were manipulated, threatened, and forced into committing illegal acts. Brian Asante initially denied all charges of child exploitation, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. The jury did not take long before finding him guilty on all charges. Brian Asante was sentenced on the 18th of October 2024 to 13 years and 4 months imprisonment. The court also issued a new order for the prevention of child exploitation for 160 months, the first of its kind in the Midlands. His co-defendants were sentenced according to their roles. Simon McTaggart received 6 years and 11 months. Maurice Reed was sentenced to 6 years and 10 months. And James Carroll was given 2 years and 2 months for helping exploit children. Alicia Cox received a 20-month suspended sentence for moving children for drug distribution. Other co-defendants, including Emma Gill, Megan Lawrence, Dylan Swan and Ghulam Izdani, were found guilty. Brian Asante and his group's conviction is an important win for the police in stopping County Lines operations. Detective Sergeant Gavin McGrath from the West Midlands Police's County Lines Task Force said it was breaking apart a well-developed and complex network that had been sending large amounts of drugs all over England. But the true success was the return of the children exploited by Asante's business. Brian Asante is behind bars, but the issues that allowed him to exploit children, poverty, family problems, the lack of social services, and the need for illegal drugs, remain. Unless we address these root causes, there will always be another Brian Asante to exploit these vulnerable children. If this story made you reflect on the dark side of technology and child exploitation, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your comments below. Let us know how you feel about the case and what can be done to protect vulnerable kids. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more true crime stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.